For those of you that may not be familiar with UNDP, we're the development arm of the United Nations, and we're based in 177 different countries. We focus on poverty alleviation through various programs such as good governance, women's empowerment, and climate. And we're very proud and honored to co-sponsor and to co-host the Plus Social Good meetings. And our role basically is to facilitate the global conversation around the Millennium Development Goals and the post-2015 agenda. So as we start the panel discussion today, I would encourage the audience, both here in person and our Twitter audience, to start sending questions about urbanization and future cities. The handle is +SocialGood. Is that correct, Anna? +SocialGood. Great. And I'll ask each of the panelists one question. We'll keep it brief because we'd really love to have that interaction with the audience. And so please start thinking about the questions. So gentlemen, when we discuss future cities, typically we imagine amazing innovations, including solar, wind, and water power, or perhaps even vertical farming techniques. I think that in our minds, the possibilities for the future are really endless. But the reality is that before we can fully get to that point, we must address and overcome challenges of mass urbanization. And there are currently 21 megacities throughout the world and growing. Many of us, quite possibly, may have never even heard of Chongqing, China, which has over 30 million inhabitants. And around the world, over 7,500 people are moving to the urban areas an hour. 7,500 people an hour. It's hard to believe that less than 100 years ago, only one in two people lived in the cities. Today, what we're seeing is more 50% of the population is living in the urban areas. And by 2050, we're expecting that to be as high as 70%. So also by 2050, we're expecting that the global population is going to be 10 billion people. So that translated means that 7 billion people will live in urban areas. And we expect most of the growth to happen in these urban areas in developing countries, in the poorest countries, where fewer resources are available to adequately respond to these issues and the magnitude of change. So as we all know, cities generate jobs and income, present opportunities for social mobilization and women's empowerment opportunities, just to name a few. But cities, face a number of continued development challenges, such as high levels of poverty and susceptibility to climate change. So for you, the audience, on today's panel, we're addressing an interesting array of topics surrounding policy, access to healthcare, infrastructure development, and even resiliency in the future cities. With that, I'd like to introduce Jordan Goldstein. Jordan is the managing director and principal at Gensler, an international architecture firm based here in Washington, D.C. So welcome, Jordan.
Good to meet you.
Thank you. Jordan, you and I discussed, I've recently returned from nearly 2 years working with UNDP in Afghanistan. And something that stood out to me while I was there is the influx of people that we saw moving from rural areas to the cities. And this obviously puts a tremendous strain on the existing infrastructure. So knowing that mass urbanization and development are issues of today and tomorrow, can you give us an insight into what types of tools Gensler is using to develop smart cities, and furthermore, how they may be used and helpful with both current and future development?
Sure. Well, first of all, great to be with all of you today. As a global architecture and design firm, I think it's been a phenomenal couple of years to really see change happen around the world, especially in urban areas. And when we look at kind of the tools that are in the designer's toolbox for us to use for new developments or kind of coming in and helping to revitalize existing communities, I think there's a couple that I would kind of tick off. One is being able to really rethink what does sustainability mean today. I think the LEED terminology and familiarity with LEED is kind of a baseline these days. And really, we look at sustainability through the lens of wellness. How can we, when we look at our communities, either new communities that we're planning or existing communities, layer in the wellness factor and really integrate active design to really encourage livable, walkable communities that have a balance of live, work, and play, and really adjusting the formula. What's the right mix for the right place at the right time? And the other side of it, I'd say, is another tool in the toolbox, is how do we look differently at the existing architecture that we have in our cities? I think so many times there's kind of that gut check to jump to new development. But how about repositioning some of the real estate that's there? Adaptive reuse is certainly a great tool for sustainability. Looking at existing buildings and thinking of new life for those buildings. A perfect example here in Washington is the Yards development, which is the old Navy Yard Annex over by the ballpark, where old factory buildings, which is rare for the city, are getting revitalized into mixed-use hubs that are anchors towards community. On the new development side, I think I like to look at, for our teams, performance-based design. So what are performance metrics that we can look at when laying out new cities? So we're doing one in Saudi Arabia right now where we're really thinking through prevailing winds, natural resources, the limits of natural resources, solar orientation, and using that to develop a strategy for laying out the massing of the community and neighborhoods and pedestrian versus vehicular transportation. And the last one I would say is really thinking about vertical cities. And you see this certainly more so in developing, fast developing countries. China, for instance, we're doing a project called Shanghai Tower, where it truly is a vertical city, where it's 121 stories. It'll be the second tallest building in the world when it's done, but it's rethinking what it means to be vertical. And how can you stack community in a way where there's natural amenities as you go vertically. Parks that are happening throughout the building, a mixed use that's happening throughout the building, and harvesting rainwater and wind to help power up the structure as we go. So rethinking and trying to bring innovation into some categories that probably have gotten a little too conventional is a way to go.
Great, thank you. And again, just in respect of time, we'll just ask one question, but I would love to ask you more questions because I think that's very interesting, actually, the way that you're reusing, existing infrastructures, the revitalization. So we'll go then to Jean-Claude. Jean-Claude Sada is the founder, chairman, and CEO of Cambridge Holdings. Cambridge Holdings is a real estate firm based in Dallas, Texas, that develops, owns, and manages healthcare facilities that promote a healthy lifestyle and mindful living. So, Jean-Claude, your organization is responsible for both promoting and creating earth-friendly, innovative, non-toxic, and healthy ways of living. And I think a good example of that is with the One City that you've just launched, broke ground with in Nashville, in Tennessee. Can you please explain to us the concept behind One City and how you feel the One City model may be used as urbanization progresses around the world?
Thank you, Leanne. Thank you for having us. Great panel, great audience. Before I answer your question, let me just take you back a little bit in history. First of all, One City is about mindful, healthy living made easier. And the part about made easier is probably the most complicated and most complex, as usually the case. We started 25 years ago developing and owning medical facilities from acute care hospitals to specialty hospitals to imaging centers, surgery centers, medical building, et cetera, that focused on one thing, the patient experience while mitigating disease. Mitigating disease has been at the core of what we do as a nation. And when you look at the entire bill of healthcare, 75% of that happens to be preventable disease. So obviously, we have a crisis. We have a problem. We keep doing the same thing over and over again in the definition of insanity, right? So when healthcare, when we started 25 years ago, healthcare was at $470 billion. It is today at $3 trillion. When we started 25 years ago, healthcare was 11% of GDP. It is currently at 19% of GDP. It's a nightmare. And we just added 60 million people, so to speak, into the system, and we're headed mostly in the wrong direction, but there's hope. So what is mindful, healthy living? What is one city? Coupled with the stuff about obesity and how we were getting sicker as a nation and we're getting fatter and our kids are getting fatter, there's something about the air that we breathe. According to the CDC, when a baby is born with 2 or 3 features from mom and dad and some 278 toxins in their bloodstream. That's scary stuff. That's stuff in the environment. We breathe it every day. So it's not enough to address the obesity side and the food and the access to food and access to movement, but it's also important to address the built environment. Very critical. So when we put one city together as an idea, one city really is a 20-acre piece of land that used to be a lumber yard with environmental issues on the west end of Nashville. Most people didn't want it. We assembled it. We had an awesome mayor, much like the quality of the mayors we've seen here today, who built a bridge, at the time a bridge to nowhere, into the property. And we used that as our template to create mindful, healthy living. What does that mean? Well, of the 20 acres, 5 acres will be green park, open areas for meditation, for water, for walks, for bikes, as little cars as possible. And the rest of it will be living, office, and shopping for people to live in a free of toxin or as free toxins as possible of an environment. So what is the experience for a person? You are a young adult starting your life, or you are an empty nester living in one of the towers there. You office there in a clean environment. The tenants in these facilities are purposely folks who are invested in technology, innovation, R&D, all the way from Vanderbilt to some of the other universities are big proponents of the concept. And the trick of it all is to create a 24/7 activated campus across the entire development where people can actually walk out of their places, take a breath of fresh air, join a yoga class on the lawn, meditate in the water-based areas, walk down to the local kitchen, which serves organic food, pick up their organic or fresh market produce, cook at their leisure, commune with friends, collaborate with people of like mind, and live a happy life. So at the end of the day, mindful, healthy living, 3 years from today, you wake up in this place, you've lost weight, you feel better, you're happier, and your social impact on the sustainability of this country, or at least of this planet for that matter, is huge. If you add every person's contribution to this process on a massive scale, and I'm here to preach the gospel of this is how it needs to happen, folks. This is how we need to reinvent the way we live, because we can't do it alone. We can't do it on a not-for-profit basis. We can't do it on a for-profit basis alone. It's a massive endeavor. And we need everybody to be singing that tune and evangelizing about mindful, healthy living made easier. So you have to be able to access these facilities. You have to be able to access the food. You have to be able to access walks and bike trails, et cetera, easier. Because today, the easiest path is processed food, insulin, drug me up, and let me be, and I'm going to live sicker and longer. That's not the answer. I think we can do better than that. Thank you.
Sounds amazing, really, and best of luck.
Thank you.
With it. Let us know when it moves up here to DC.
And anybody wants to live there?
So moving on to Reed. Reed Detchen is the Vice President of Energy and Climate at the United Nations Foundation. He also has the honor of being the Executive Director for the Energy Future Coalition, which is an initiative hosted by the UN Foundation, which advocates for U.S. energy policy. So Reed, we've heard some amazing innovations taking place around urbanization. But cities currently consume more than 75% of the world's energy and unfortunately contribute to over 80% of the greenhouse emissions. And research has indicated as well that cities continue to grow, that as cities continue to grow into these megacities, that they're more vulnerable to climate change. So one of the ongoing and continued challenges that we're seeing in addressing climate change has been a lack of international political consensus. So can you please share with us, in your opinion, how can we progress on climate issues without significant progress already having taken place on the political front?
Well, thank you, Leanne. I think you very accurately portrayed the interaction between environment, cities, and politics. I think we have to think about this as a two-way street. So we've heard a fair amount today about the impact of the environment on citizens, cities themselves. But there's also, you have to think about it the other way around. How are the cities affecting the environment? And in particular on climate change, we will see both an impact of the climate change on cities, but we also have to think about the contribution of cities to climate change. And that works politically as well. There is a need for progress in international negotiations, but political progress tends to start at the bottom. And so if we can use cities as templates for how to make progress on climate change, that will influence the negotiations as well. So if you think about any place, but cities in particular, it's where weather hits home. And so people feel the impacts very directly, whether it's air pollution in Beijing or flooding in New Orleans. The impacts of environmental insults are felt keenly at the city level, but they're also clustered and inherently efficient if they are dense. So if we build our cities right, if we use good principles of urban design and healthful living, we hope as well, then we're going to be able to have the best of both worlds, which is to say you will use less energy per person by being clustered together, and that will have a benefit to the environment. So I think that in turn, one of the great things about cities is, as you mentioned, is that they're incubators of innovation. And so a lot of these solutions that we're going to need for climate change are going to come out of cities, whether it's in the form of energy efficient buildings or better traffic patterns or advanced transit. These are the solutions that are going to bubble up. And that's what influences the politics, and that's what makes international progress possible.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And then we'll move on to our final panelist, Andrew. Andrew Salkin is the Chief Operating Officer for 100 Resilient Cities, which is a program based out of the Rockefeller Foundation. And 100 Resilient Cities is dedicated to helping cities around the world becoming more resilient to the physical, social, and economic challenges that cities face in the 21st century. So, Andrew, as we mentioned earlier, by 2050, over 70% of the world's population will reside in urban areas. As we've heard, this puts quite a strain and a demand on the physical infrastructure and programming. So in your opinion, how can cities prepare for this? And how, more to the point, can public-private partnerships contribute to developing more sustainable and resilient cities?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Thanks for letting me join the panel today. So that's a good question, and it's something we talk about a lot. And the idea that cities are going to become more and more important in the world as time goes on. And we believe that things are going to happen to cities. You can't really take it away. And because cities are going to become more important, when bad things happen to cities, they have to be more and more prepared. And what we're doing at 100 Resilient Cities is we're defining resilience very broadly. We're defining resilience as the ability of individuals, communities, institutions, businesses, and the systems within a city to not only survive, adapt, and grow when faced with any type of shock or stress. So this idea that the infrastructure that makes up the city today is something that has to be understood, and how it's going to play into the city tomorrow is critical. And the cities have to take these steps to be to start preparing to understand what the impact will be as their populations change, as well as their infrastructure ages, or as new infrastructure comes on board. And as they begin to take that exercise of preparing, we're hoping that they'll be able to leverage this exercise to begin to think more broadly. And then as they think more broadly, they'll be able to signal to different parts of their communities and outside communities that this is what we're going to do, this is our plan, this is how we're going to survive, and then this is the ability for them to bring in additional resources, whether it's through public-private partnerships or government funding or non-government funding, to help the city think through, help the city achieve its goals of becoming more resilient. So that's what we're trying to help cities think through, and we're trying to help them prepare, and at the same time prepare to leverage this preparedness to be even more balanced and a better place to be.
Great, wonderful. I think with that, you have some amazing panelists up here who have given you some incredible, very interesting information. And so I'd like to actually take it, and it looks like Anna has some questions prepared already. I'd like to take it to the floor and invite the audience members here to go to Anna with their questions. And then Anna, I think you have Twitter questions as well.
So I'm going to start with Twitter, actually with live stream. What does a modern waste management system look like in a future city?
Okay, waste management.
That's a good one.
That is a good question.
Yeah.
Who would like to
the
take that?
designer in the house, maybe?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that, I could give an example. We're doing this project called K-Care in about 40 miles outside of Riyadh. It's called King Abdullah Community for Atomic and Renewable Energy. And everything about the city is meant to be truly a sustainable new city, including the waste management systems, meaning that you're trying to basically create a world that is better through the city living and through residency or work in the city by virtue of being in there, and that all the infrastructure has to support that. So in that case, the renewable energy systems are actually tied into the waste management systems, so that there's actually really, in a sense, kind of a life cycle strategy to that. I had planned one several years ago where we were looking at really biomass systems where we were coming in and designing new communities that had slightly away from the community a waste management program that looked at actually recycling everything that the community was creating, in a sense, as waste, for lack of a better term, that was basically using to fuel the energy needs of the community. They're pretty advanced systems. Not too many communities have embraced them yet. They are expensive, but they are transformative.
I would just
The other answer is to call the mayor.
No pressure.
I would just add as general principles, and I'm sure this is familiar to many of you, there's sort of the 3 R's of waste management. Number 1, reduce. Don't waste as much as you typically do. Reuse. Can you repurpose or use eBay or something to give it to somebody else to make use of it, and recycle. So I think that the first step of any waste management strategy is a waste minimization strategy. And thinking about that in a life cycle sense, the way Jordan was describing is exactly right.
Excellent.
We have one more question from Twitter. How can future cities integrate principles of a circular economy? And because I didn't know what a circular economy, I admit it, I looked it up. And it's the generic term for an industrial economy that is by design or intention restorative, and in which material flows are of 2 types: biological nutrients designed to re-enter the biosphere safely, and technical nutrients which are designed to circulate at high quality without entering the biosphere. Who would like to take that one?
I think it's very similar to the last one in a sense, because you want to think about how you use any kind of materials in a life cycle fashion. And so designing that system intelligently is critical in the beginning. And once you have that, whether it's a waste facility or whatever, then you are going to be meeting the principles that the questioner described.
This may be a tangent to the question too, but I think there's There's a great book I was recently kind of leafing through. The book is Makers, and it really looks at how we're a society of makers now, and that maker economy means that the idea of manufacturing and the idea of in a sense, life cycle can really be down at a much more micro level, and it can be, in a sense, in your community. And there's that idea that you would be basically having the ability to have your own factory, make what you need to make to support whatever your business is, and then you're, in a sense, the industry idea is within rather than outside, which brings the whole idea of transportation and logistics, goods to consumer. It shortens that whole cycle down, and from an energy standpoint, that's phenomenal when you're able to kind of have that resiliency built in.
Maybe perhaps a sort of tangential answer is at One City, part of what we're doing is we're using recycled materials as many places as we can. We did that in our offices in Dallas, where the floors are recycled fallen trees. By way of example, the concrete we've used is crushed concrete. The granite table for our boardroom is recrushed granite. We have provided skylights to bring in natural light. We've put all the executive offices in the middle so that everybody, even with cubicles, has access to natural light. We've created collaboration areas, much like One City on a larger scale would have collaboration areas for different generations to come and collaborate and talk and eat and share. I think a focus on prevention of disease, the focus on better health takes away a lot of the resources, whether it's less food consumed or less bad food consumed. And so it's a universe of issues. It's a universe of stuff that you put together. We're recycling all our rainwater so that all our irrigation is free of third-party water. We're self-sufficient. And ultimately, our goal is to return the land to its primitive state. In other words, despite the fact we're going to put 1 million something square feet on that 20 acres with parks, our intent is to get to a CFC of 0 back to where we started. It's a big goal. It's an expensive goal. That stuff is not cheap. But it's in our case, it's done because it's part of the social good of returning the earth to where it needs to be. That's as much shameless promotion as I'm going to do today.
That's why we invited everybody. Can we have those in the audience that would like to ask a question come over? You have to speak on the microphone so the live stream can hear you.
And while we're doing that as well, I also have a question actually for the panel, just in general. We're all interested in urbanization because it's going to affect all of us to some degree. And so I'm just curious, in your opinion, how do we as an audience, as a layperson, how do we steer the discourse of the public development policy in urbanization, like as we go forward? What would you recommend that each one of us could do, to really have an impact, on development as we go forward?
I mean, I guess I'll take a first shot at that. I think I really think that it is an opportunity to kind of, we talked a little bit about this the other day, but crowdsourcing strategies for development. How do we as communities start to prioritize what is the right areas to focus on within our communities and connect kind of the public-private sides of the world together so that we can have a development strategy that is layered on smart growth and really creating vibrancy in our communities. And I think there are definitely pockets happening. I think you heard some of that this morning on the mayoral panel, and I'm really encouraged by that, where the people are really getting into the idea of contributing to their community and enhancing that community. And I think what that fosters, by the way, is a real sense of pride of place. And a belief in neighborhoods. And I'm a native Washingtonian, and one of the things I think is phenomenal is you really see the rise of neighborhoods in Washington now. The pride of different neighborhoods and identity of these different neighborhoods in a sense of sub-brands of the city, which is really phenomenal. And we didn't really have that before. And I think that's because of social media and people really plugging in to an active engagement in their community.
Well, Jordan, wouldn't you say that as a developer, you have to be very responsive to your potential customer base. So the lifestyle choices that we all make are going to help guide the way you shape your development.
Very true, and I actually think that that's the greatest thing is kind of the market demand now. We work with so many developers that are really trying to read the tea leaves, before they put a shovel in the ground. And I'm sure you've experienced this through the One City initiative. But here certainly, and actually in other communities that we work, one of the things I really love is that when there's this real kind of almost like focus group strategy to try to understand what's that mix of live, work, play that helps this puzzle piece become a contributor to the larger city around it, rather than just being a one-off design and development solution. And how do you kind of hack into the city fabric and create something that is truly a differentiator and brings up the whole community through the development process?
So if I could offer a different perspective, on the resilience front, what we're trying to do is bring resilience to the forefront of the conversation within the city. And we're using the city as our intervention very specifically, as the change agent within the community. And what we want to do is help the city as a whole understand not only their stress and shocks and the risks around stresses and shocks, but also add this notion of resilience to them, to their thinking. Where are they strong around resilience, and where are they weak around resilience, and how do you leverage where you're strong to fight back the certain shocks that you may be facing, and how do you build up your weaknesses so that when they happen, so when the shock happens, you're not going to be undermined. One of the things we are seeing in many of the cities we've gone to, and we're working with 32 cities around the world right now, is this notion of how strong is your community, and the basis of your community being a core building block, not only for how you might help get involved in development decisions, but really when bad things happen to cities, it's the communities that are the first ones on the line of defense that are surviving, and they're the ones who come together and pull their city together. And we're trying to help the city recognize the individual and the communities in which the individuals are parts of, to help bring that out as a core resilience component that doesn't just help with the last flood that you had or the fire that you had, but it's also going to help you deal with the economic downturn or the oil spill, or whatever comes your way.
Right. That's excellent.
I think the message to the population at large, to answer your question, is to elect and be involved with the election of good progressive mayors. I think the mayor's office is perhaps the most potent weapon we look for when we go into a city to locate a one city. Perfect example in Nashville, and certainly the folks presented here. We have a mayor who is a Democrat, totally pro-business, who works with a governor who's totally Republican, with a state senator who's even more Republican, and everybody works together because this concept of mindful, healthy living affects every one of us regardless of who we are. And if you find that mayor that has a brain that is concerned about the citizens' well-being and the personal health as it affects sustainability and the global city that we talk about, then I think you should wrap around that. You should support that and make sure that that person gets elected, because that's our first calling card. That's where we go to create these places, because we need that support. We're not asking for money. We're not asking for funds. We're just asking for support. And that support comes from the mayor saying, guess what? I'm going to organize a 5K every Sunday. I'm going to lose weight. I'm going to put up the flag up here that Nashville is going to be a fit city. That's the beacon we look for when we go into these places.
Excellent. So I think we'll go to the mic then. If you could please tell us your name and where you're based, or excuse me, who you're with, and then if you could just keep the question brief, please.
My name is Lydia Durand.
Oops, can you speak up?
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes.
My name is Lydia Durand, and I actually am a recent graduate of grad school, so still idealistic. I guess I'm listening to all these great ideas, and particularly the One City initiative. You're talking about how kids are being born with different, toxic substances in them, and they're being exposed to chemicals and a variety of environmental factors, and then not to put you on the spot, but like the One City initiative sounds fantastic, but some of the populations that could benefit from that sort of environment the most are low-income and minority populations. And as you said, that sort of environment, the One City initiative, is very expensive. So there's a little bit of or how would you work with cities, and I guess to everybody, how would you work with cities to take this ideal environment, but to apply it to a population that when those types of products and lifestyle opportunities come into play, get moved out to areas where they aren't situated. Again, just kind of, I guess you can see it in here in DC a little bit more, where populations are just pushed farther and farther
Yeah.
out.
That's a great
That's
question.
that's a great question, and let me make it even worse before we make it any better. Those places you talk about are not only toxic, but they're also food deserts in most cases. You get the typical blighted area where a woman with 3 kids lives in a high-rise apartment that lacks security, where the closest ride to nourishment is a McDonald's that's a bus ride away. That's a systemic problem. That's a bad problem.
Can I make it worse?
Please.
And
We're on a roll here.
But it's quite often that those are the communities within a city that have the most unrest. And you've seen this in my hometown in New York, right? When a stress happens, a blackout, those are the communities that blow up. And those are the least healthy ones as well. It impacts our society so many different ways.
Well, keep going.
No, you're the one who's going to fix it.
Now you got to make it better.
I think
I just wanted to make it worse. You have to make it better.
I think there's several things that are happening that cause us some optimism. One is initiatives like this. I think we need to think of a one city for those kinds of areas and what that entails, working with the mayors of those cities. It is not an easy solution. But there's also something called the Accountable Care Organization that's Act that's now being passed very, very slowly, but it's getting there, which is focused more on reimbursing hospitals for prevention and healthcare systems for prevention, more so than treating acuity and certainly repetitive acuity of care. We're seeing hospital systems react to that. I think the smart ones, the progressive ones, are creating educational systems that are actually taking over blocks of neighborhoods and creating their own organic gardens and teaching tools for people, minorities and less poorer areas, to educate them on better food, better cooking, better action, better moving, better access to all that stuff. It's a slow process. The good news is it's starting to be reimbursed from a prevention standpoint by Medicare and hopefully soon to follow insurance. So there's that bit of good news. I think the fundamental problem will remain as long as we have inaction and initiatives and panels like this where an idea comes out and somebody in this audience, whether it's the Calvert Foundation or the likes, comes up with something that is a hybrid between what one city is, which is on the high end of the scale, and combining an insurance product that focuses on prevention with a blighted areas plight using the mayor's office to create something that is affordable. Personally, on a personal level, from a philanthropic standpoint, I'm a believer that good philanthropy is for-profit philanthropy. And if you can create a model that's sustainable, that actually makes money in those areas, I think you have something that matters because it will sustain itself and will keep going. But it's a long-term problem, and it's exacerbated by the locale of where these problems are and the obesity rate and the crime rate. But it's a problem that we need to deal with.
And I'm sorry, Jordan.
I was just going to say, just real quick to add on to it, you talk about the low income neighborhoods. We did a recent one. So I also think it's really interesting when you go kind of outside of the normal resources you have, bring in additional resources to tackle a problem and look at it from a different perspective. We did one recently where we grabbed students from 2 universities in the US and 2 universities in Thailand. And we went into Bangkok and did a study of the low-income neighborhoods in Bangkok, Thailand. And it was fascinating because what we thought, we found exactly the opposite of what we thought we would find. And we were finding that there's kind of certain sides of the low-income neighborhood that the community there likes. There's certainly tons of problems. So how do you then, in a sense, bring change to the community that builds on what they like, but gives them the opportunity to have change and grow and change and transform their community. We then actually brought all these students back. They wrote a fantastic white paper on how do you enhance community, rather than say, you know what, we're going to move everybody out of there and redevelop this area, and low-income housing will come in a totally different way. That's dramatic change and really, really hard to do. But there's ways to really augment community and take something and actually transform in an incremental way that brings kind of incremental revolution rather than just small evolution.
And to just quickly dovetail off of what's already been said, there's actually quite a lovely success story in Bogota about, it happened from 1998 to 2001. The mayor there implemented, this stretch of road, basically. He closed miles, I think it was 17 miles of highway, and created parks and, that ran throughout the entire city. Instead of spending his money, and Mayor, I see you shaking your head, so you're obviously familiar with this, but instead of spending his very low resources, a low amount of resources on paving roads for the 2% of people that have cars, he invested that money in creating an environment for the low-income families, because they oftentimes are the ones that are going to use these resources. They're the ones that that want to be outside of their apartments and don't have the space, they don't have the yards. And so it's actually, I would encourage you to look it up, because as a case study, it's really an amazing success story how a mayor, turned his, funding into something that was extremely creative, very innovative, and that allowed the community to really grow and to prosper.
It goes back to your initial question to me about politics. I mean, he saw that 2% of the public was cramming onto a roadway to commute into Bogota, and everybody else was stuck walking, and the bus lanes weren't working and so forth.
Right.
And he converted that to bus rapid transit. He made the sidewalks twice as big, enabled biking, and now the 98% who weren't in those cars are very happy. Now, he may have made the 2% unhappy,
Yeah.
but that was a pretty good political calculation.
Yeah, no, it was excellent.
I think one thought I'll put out there for everybody is this idea of what's going on in Colombia, right? So Colombia as a country, at least from my observations, seems to be a place where these cities are really embracing creativity and innovation, and they're thinking about how do they really make the whole city work for all the people that live there. Bogota's story is one. I was recently in Medellin at the World Urban Forum, and they've done all kinds of amazing things. And I heard the former mayor of Medellin speak, and he spoke about this really interesting statement. I think gets a little bit to your question. He said, just because you're poor, right, doesn't mean you don't deserve beautiful things. And this notion that all over Colombia, you hear just these amazing stories of innovation, and everyone's flocking there to see what they're doing and how you can learn. And what they're really doing is embracing the poor and saying, you need to be a part of our community. You need to be linked to economic opportunity. You need to be able to live in your neighborhoods and enjoy your time there. And I think it's really interesting to see what's going on. And I think what makes it really interesting is it's the whole country seems to be doing innovative work. And that's one of the things that's very exciting and something I'm trying to follow and we'll figure out as we continue to work with different cities around the world. But the lessons of Colombia seem to be playing out and popping up everywhere.
That's right. Thank you for your question. Mayor, if we could...
I have
the
a
last
very
question.
brief
Okay.
question. So we spend a lot of time talking about innovation, technology, and millennials, but there's a social phenomenon that's happening, and it's the care of our elders. And a lot of people are older, but they don't necessarily need to be in a nursing home or hospitalized, but you have people who are responsible for their elder parents. And are there any examples domestically or internationally where there are multifamily housing that's multi-generational?
Great question. We actually just completed a year-long study that we did with the University of Maryland here, where it was looking at active aging and aging in place, and how do you rethink the house, and how do you rethink the community that multi-generations would be under the same roof, and that their needs would change, and therefore the house would need to change over time. It was in partnership with a developer that is actually now looking at sites and testing those sites around the Mid-Atlantic area to implement this kind of new idea of community. But the basic strategy is that my parents, as they age, would be able to live with me, or that they move into a home. And instead of the scenario now where it's kind of the empty nest and they're like, where do I move to because my house can't support my changing level of activity, that actually they could move into a new kind of community. And the house could evolve with them, and it could have caregivers, it could have additional family members in there, and everyone could, in a sense, live in harmony in a flexible, evolving house.
Yeah, and really avoiding what we tend to do, which is basically segregating them and putting them all with people who are the same age, who have the same ailments, as opposed to multi-generational interaction, which is very good for your mental and physical health.
As well for the younger generation.
That's right, yeah.
I mean, in his book, Dan Buetter, The Blue Zones, where they found places where people live the longest around the world. People live beyond the age of 100. And part of the litany of reasons why they did, besides access to fresh food and movement and activity, et cetera, was the interaction with parents and grandparents, kids and grandkids, and friends, and keeping that mental attitude going. And we're very mindful of that at One City. Again, shameless promotion here, but we are looking at an area product all the way from starter apartments to empty nesters to older people for the purpose of creating these collaboration areas where people can benefit from each other's age category. And I think that's very critical. I think it's important. But that's a far cry from saying we're doing it in one place to a national movement. But you got to start somewhere.
I would also offer, just from an international perspective, as I mentioned, I was with UNDP in Afghanistan for nearly 2 years, and in many developing countries, this multi-generational, living is very common, and it's very beneficial. I mean, you see the benefits of it, as was mentioned. The grandchildren know their grandparents. The grandparents are active because of the grandchildren and their children, and so if there's something that we can do, here in the United States, just as an example, to really promote that type of living, I think would be extremely beneficial for not only us, but our parents, our children. So that's an excellent question.
Well, it is very traditional. Instead of back to the future, we're going forward into the past.
That's right. That's right.
I'll leave you with one quick story brief, which is we have a client in Thailand, and I love this idea that they have. They want to locate active aging communities next to orphanages and tie them together so that actually the children that are in those orphanages benefit from, in a sense, parental supervision, interaction, and engagement that they wouldn't normally have. And those that are in the active aging community have their lives enriched by being next to those young people.
That's great.
I will add that my grandmother is 103 years of age this year, still kicking, has a boyfriend who's 85 years old, and is taking applications in 140 characters or less, and she doesn't know what Twitter is. So, but she is the embodiment of that life, of the cross-generational life, of eating better, of meditating, of praying a lot, and all the stuff we just talked about. It happens, it can happen, and it's pretty wonderful to watch.
That's wonderful, and I think that that's actually a wonderful note to end on. So thank you so much, all of you, for the wonderful discussion. And Anna, we'll turn it over to you.